Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2020 Tang Prize Masters Forum in Sustainable Development. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Tang Prize Foundation has organized a series of forums. These online forums provide the public with the rare chance to converse with the laureates. Today, we are immensely honored to have the world's leading experts on vital issue of sustainability with us to enlighten us about the ways to fulfill a sustainable human society in the age of COVID-19. Dr. Jane Goodall, laureate of the 2020 Tang Prize in Sustainable Development, will join us remotely later from her home in Bournemouth, the UK. And now, we would like to invite Hong He Chen, President of National Tsinghua University, to give his welcome remarks. Let's welcome President He Chen.
President Liao, Dr. Chen, honorable panelists and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Known as Oriental Nobel Prize, Tang Prize was established to recognize outstanding researchers whose works have greatly benefited our planet and society. While we are now facing the challenge of COVID-19, we reflect on how we, humans, could coexist with nature and how to achieve balanced and sustainable development in the social, economic, and environmental aspects. Looking around the world, if we are to select an individual who has the best personified the spirit of sustainability, I'm sure the name of Jane Goodall will top all the lists in our mind. As a physical anthropologist, she pioneered in the study of chimpanzees, and from that, she corrected an age-old anthropological definition of man, the toolmaker. Following her groundbreaking research on the higher primate, she expanded her research to the preservation of wildlife and environmental protection. Her devotion and contribution to wildlife and environmental preservation is second to none. And for that reason, she is now honored with the Sustainable Development Award by the Tang Prize Foundation. Some of you may be aware of that Dr. Jane Goodall is an honorary doctor of National Tsinghua University. Today, all my colleagues and students share the happiness and pride to witness Dr. Goodall in winning the prestigious Tang Prize. The motto of National Tsinghua University is self-discipline and social commitment, which is derived from the Book of Change, emphasizing that people should strive for a harmonious and sustainable coexistence with nature through unremitting effort. Dr. Goodall is the best example of our school motto. Today, in the United Nations Global Goals Week, we have the great honor to have President Liao of Academia Sinica to serve as the chair of this forum, and Professor Su Huizhen, President of National Cheung Kong University, as well as Professor Li Jiawei from the Department of Life Science on this campus. As the panelists, I hope with their intellectual discussion, we can further heighten the awareness and respect for the nature. Finally, Dr. Goodall once said, and I quote, "If people work together and use our amazing wisdom with blessing to care about the future of the earth and the future generations, There is still more time to find a way out, and we should never give up. Facing the tough challenges of the pandemic and various problems on the earth, let us adhere to Dr. Goodall's advice. Working together, we should strive for a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chen. Please take your seat. Now, let's invite all the guests and participants to take photos together in your own seats. Please look the front. Thank you so much. Now, let's invite the moderator of the forum, James Liao, the president of Academia Sinica, to give his opening remarks and introduce the 2020 Tang Prize laureates. Welcome.
President Ho Chen, Dr. Li, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are online. The Tang Prize Foundation was established in 2012 by Dr. Samuel Ng. It included the Sustainable Development Award to recognize those who have made extraordinary contributions to the sustainable development of human societies. Now the prestigious prize in its fourth edition, and we are at a critical time in human history to lay out the concrete plans for sustainable development. 2020 has been fraught with challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still continuing to disrupt people's way of life everywhere around the world. Besides its impact on human health, the pandemic has taken a toll on the economy. Many people lost their jobs. Graduates were hardly able to secure full-time positions. The unemployment rate is rising. Governments are under tremendous pressure to contain the spread of virus, while mulling over reopening the economy. The impact of this ongoing pandemic is not just economic, but also social and environmental. Inequalities within the country and between nations have been obvious and significant. The pandemic affected the poor to a greater extent than it did the rich. Prolonged lockdowns have had negative effects on people's mental health and subjected the vulnerable to domestic abuse. Children's education has been disrupted. People are getting used to virtual meetings like this. While emissions of greenhouse gas drop due to reduced human activity, this phenomenon is likely to reverse when people resume business as usual after the pandemic. It will not help reverse climate change, which is an equally urgent issue as we are experiencing increasingly severe global warming and seeing extreme weather events occurring in the world, such as recent wildfires on the west coast of the United States. The 2020 laureate of the Tang Prize in Sustainable Development, Dr. Jane Goodall, is nothing but the role model and the enlightening voice we need in these times of uncertainty. Dr. Goodall is best known for her pioneering study of chimpanzees at Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania. Her research on our closest relative marks the 60th anniversary this year, which makes it the longest-running wildlife study on the planet. Dr. Goodall's groundbreaking discovery that chimpanzees make and use tools redefined the relationship between humans and animals. Thanks to her work, we now understand that human beings, animals, and the environment are linked inextricably. This awareness is a vital step towards sustainable development on a global scale. As a true advocate for conservation of wildlife and nature, Dr. Goodall was named UN Messenger of Peace in 2002. She founded the Jane Goodall Institute in 1977 to further her cause of conservation of chimpanzees and the environment. In 1994, the Jane Goodall Institute initiated Take Care, a community-led and holistic conservation program in Tanzania, which succeeded in alleviating poverty in the region and restoring the biodiversity there. In 1991, Dr. Goodall started the Roots and Shoots program, which aims to empower the next generation to become socially and environmentally conscious citizens of the planet. If it were not for the pandemic, Dr. Goodall, now 86, would have still been traveling an average of 300 days a year around the world, tirelessly communicating her message of the importance of environmental conservation and her reasons of hope for the future of all lives on Earth. Her lifelong dedication to conservation, environmental education, and sustainability is unrivaled. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the forum we are holding today aims to consolidate thoughts and wisdom from experts and the audience, to contemplate the way to live in harmony with the animals and nature. I hope through lively discussion and exchange of ideas, we can all gain a better understanding of how we should build a better and sustainable common future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Liao. Please take your seat. And now, our laureate, Dr. Jane Goodall, will deliver her speech for the forum.
Hello. I'm so sad that I can't be with you all for this Tang Prize Masters Forum. But like so many others, I'm trapped in the UK because of this pandemic that's disrupting our world at the moment. I have to say I'm still somewhat shattered and immensely honoured to have been selected as the winner of this year's Tang Prize. And I must thank the wonderful team of the Jane Goodall Institute in Taiwan for the hard work they put into promoting my cause. I want to assure everyone that the prize money will be used in the best possible way that we can to make this a better world. We're going through pretty dark times right now, socially, politically, and environmentally. We're in the midst of the 6th great extinction of plant and animal life. We're creating these greenhouse gases by our reckless burning of fossil fuel and emitting of other so-called greenhouse gases that are like a blanket around the globe, trapping the heat of the sun, leading to change, disruption in climate patterns everywhere, leading to what we call the climate crisis. And now we have this pandemic. And the tragedy is that to some extent, we've brought this on ourselves. We've disrespected the natural world. We've disrespected the other animal species with whom we share or should share this planet. For example, we destroy part of a forest, and this may force animal species into contact with each other. species that normally wouldn't be in contact at all. And this can create a situation where a pathogen, a virus or a bacteria, and so on, can spill over, jump, cross the barrier from one species to another. And this may create a new disease. And some animals are pushed into closer contact with humans as their own food supply is depleted by us. And these animals may be forced to crop raid or go into cities in search of food, and again, creating a situation which can lead to a new so-called zoonotic disease, a disease created as a pathogen jumps from an animal to a human. In fact, we hear that most new diseases afflicting human beings actually originate in animals. We disrespect animals. We hunt them, kill them, eat them, and we traffic them. So hunters move deeper and deeper into the forest, and as they kill animals and sell them in the bushmeat markets of Africa, for example, this can create a situation for another zoonotic disease. HIV/AIDS, that terrible pandemic, originated when chimpanzees were butchered in Central Africa. And this particular pandemic, which is afflicting us all now, COVID-19, is thought to have started in one of the wildlife markets in Asia. And this is because we are trafficking animals. We're capturing them and sending them or their parts around the world. We may get animals from different regions of a country or even different countries in some of these wildlife markets in Asia. And that's how this pandemic is supposed to have begun, as a virus jumped from an animal in one of these markets to a human, bonded with a cell and created COVID-19. These wildlife markets, which sell animals for food, sometimes killed on the spot or as pets, are typically incredibly cruel. Animals in close contact in small wire cages. They're typically unhygienic, and so a seller and a buyer can be contaminated by the blood, urine, or feces of an animal, and perfect environment for a new zoonotic disease. So this pandemic, which is affecting everyone, was at least in part our fault. Other SARS was also created as a virus spilled over in another wildlife market in Asia and bonded with a human, creating this infectious disease. MERS started as a domestic camel, a virus from a domestic camel infected a person in the Middle East. And then there's our factory farms, where we breed animals in most cruel and crowded conditions to supply a growing demand for meat around the world. And many zoonotic diseases have originated as a person working in one of these so-called concentration camps for animals was contaminated and it turned into a new disease. So this pandemic, unfortunately, although it can affect rich and poor alike, is having a more it's having a more profound effect on the poor. In Africa, for example, many people live from hand to mouth. They live by selling what they can each day to buy food to feed themselves and their families that night. And if they're told they have to go into lockdown, then they can no longer make a living and they starve. And people in India, the poor people who'd moved in from the rural areas to make a living somehow in an urban area, with lockdown, there was nobody to care for them. They felt they needed to go back to the rural areas. And what were they going to do there? The rural areas, their families were struggling anyway. So all of this is making it harder for the Millennium Goals to be met. Poverty is increasing, and this will affect child education, and everything is interconnected in this world. I learned that in the rainforest, where you find that every little species has a role to play. And it may seem insignificant, but if it disappears, well, maybe it was the main food source of another species, and so on, and that ripple effect can lead to ecosystem collapse. Well, people are fighting this pandemic, fighting for a cure, fighting for a vaccine. And governments have risen in most countries to immediately impose measures to control the spread of the disease. We will come through this. But, I mean, we always do. We came through the Spanish flu, we came through the Black Death. We will come through this pandemic. But at the same time, and what is affecting the planet even as we fight this pandemic, we shall emerge to a much more serious, much more threatening problem, and that's climate crisis. And it's the same disrespect of the natural world that has led to the climate crisis. Why can't governments react in the same way to this really existential threat that faces us? Why has there been so little effort on the part of governments and businesses to address the climate issue? Why have they been dragging their feet? Why are some business leaders and governments today in the pandemic just waiting to get back to business as usual? And does it make sense that there can be unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources? Already we're using up these natural resources in some places faster than Mother Nature can replenish them. And so, on a planet with finite resources and a growing human population, the idea that there can be this unlimited economic development doesn't make sense. And this unlimited economic development isn't even benefiting people as a whole. It's just benefiting some people who are acquiring riches and more riches, money and more money, stuff and more stuff. And somehow, will we learn from this pandemic that it's time to do things differently? Will we learn that we need to think out a new way of relating to the natural world, of which we are part and on which we depend? Can we get together and find a new green economy, a different way of thinking about development? And, you know, the sad thing is that so many people can't do much about this. They're poor, they're starving, they're sick, but some of us can. And my hope for the future lies in the fact that there must be hundreds of thousands of people, especially from the big cities, who during the pandemic for the first time have had the luxury of breathing clean air as factories were closed down and there was less traffic on the streets. People heard the birds sing in the cities, maybe for the first time. People could look up at the night sky and see the stars bright instead of through a haze of pollution. Indeed, sometimes you can't see the stars at all because of the pollution. So maybe there will be enough people around the world, a growing multitude of people who don't want to go back to the old way of pollution. Maybe there will be more people who've thought about what we're doing to the planet, what we're doing to the future of our children. We haven't been just compromising the children's future, we've been stealing it. Will we continue to steal it? We've got a window of time, I feel convinced of that, when, if we get together, we can start healing some of the harm we've inflicted, and we can at least slow down climate change. We can at least reduce the possibility of too many more pandemics, and that we will have learned lessons about how to contain them more quickly next time. But we've got to alleviate poverty, because the really poor people can't make the ethical choices that we need to make, each one of us, as we go through each day. We make an impact on the environment. And if we choose ethically what we buy, what we eat, what we wear, did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals? Is it cheap because of child slave labor or unacceptable low wages in another country? The poor people, they'll cut down the last trees, fish the last fish in their desperation to grow more food or make some money to feed their family. In an urban area, they're going to buy the cheapest junk food. They can't afford to ask those questions about whether it harmed the environment. So we have to do something about alleviating poverty. And it's going to be harder. And we have to think about the unsustainable lifestyle of so many of us. Do we have more than we actually need? Some people have so much more than they need. Who needs 4 houses? Who needs a private jet? Well, a few people perhaps, but an awful lot of people use them that don't need to. And we have to think about our own ecological footprint as we go through life. And we can't ignore the fact that on this planet today, there's said to be about 7.2 billion people getting richer, wanting to emulate the kind of lifestyle that we now know must be changed. And it's said that in 2050, there will be 9.7 billion of us. How will the planet cope? We've got to think about these things. But my hope lies in the fact that our young people, and the Jane Goodall Institute has this program, Roots and Shoots, which is now in 65 countries, with young people from kindergarten through university, and young messages that each one of us makes a difference every single day. We have a role to play, and they choose projects between them. They choose to make things better for people, for animals, and for the environment. And at the same time, as we try and bring them together, usually virtually, today certainly, but occasionally face-to-face, and they're learning that far more important than the color of the skin, the religion, the culture, the age, whatever, is the fact that we're one human family. Our blood is the same. When we cry, our tears are the same. We mourn, we joy. We are one human family. And everywhere when I'm traveling around the world, there are young people wanting to tell Dr. Jane what they've been doing to make this a better world. Eyes shining. They're changing the world. And there's this amazing brain. We're coming up with technology that is enabling us to live in greater harmony with the world. All the solar and wind and tide, clean green energy, renewable energy, and in many other ways technology is helping. And then we're using our brain to think about our own impact on the planet. Nature is incredibly resilient. You can destroy an area and give it time and perhaps a helping hand, and once again it can support life. You have so many examples of that in Taiwan, and I don't have time to talk about them, but cleaning polluted rivers and restoring the landlocked salmon, so close to extinction. Animals on the brink of extinction can and have been and are being given a second chance. And then finally, there's what I call the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up, and sometimes succeed. And even if they don't succeed, others will have been inspired to follow in their footsteps. I wish there was time for me to talk about some of these inspirational people that I've met. I wish there was time for me to talk about some of the Roots and Shoots project. I wish there was time for me to talk about some of the amazing projects I've seen to restore nature to a place that we destroyed. But as it is, that is the time I have. And once again, let me end by saying thank you for awarding me this Tang Prize, and I promise I'll do my best, and so will the JGI and Roots and Shoots teams, to make a difference with the prize money. So thank you so much, and soon I hope I will be able to travel again and come and meet you all in person. So thank you, and I think we have time for some questions. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Jane Guido, for the wonderful speech. Now, we would like to share remarks delivered by previous laureates of Tang Prize in Sustainable Development. Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Norwegian Prime Minister, the former Director General of WHO, 2014 Tang Prize laureate in Sustainable Development. Dr. James Hansen, Director of the Program on Climate Science, Awareness and Solutions of Institute, Columbia University, 2018 Tang Prize laureate in Sustainable Development. And Professor Vijayabhadran Ramanathan Edward A., Freeman A. Dodd Presidential Chair in Climate Sustainability at the University of California, San Diego, 2018 Tang Prize laureate in Sustainable Development. And now, let's enjoy their remarks by beginning with Dr. Brundtland.
My warm congratulations to this year's awardee, Jane Goodall, a hero of the environmental movement. We have both been working on spreading messages of great concern for planet Earth and humanity for decades. Today, we are in the midst of a global health crisis, a pandemic, unraveling social and economic shocks, adding to the burden of disease and death across the world. I co-chair the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board on behalf of the World Bank and the World Health Organization. In our first report last September, we called the alarm. We had found compelling evidence of a very real threat of a rapidly moving, highly lethal pandemic of a respiratory pathogen which could kill millions of people and wipe out sizable parts of the world economy. Now we are there. Humanity was not well prepared, although these risks have been made very clear after a series of experiences characterized by a following pattern of panic and neglect. So a real need for good leadership at local, national, and global levels has been dramatically demonstrated. We are in all of this together. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Our global interdependence has once more been dramatically illustrated. Young people who have stubbornly raised their voices these last couple of years on the drama linked to climate and the prospects of their own future must be nodding and concluding. Now our interdependence has become evident. A virus is affecting the whole planet directly and short-term. It cannot be wished away. They must be hoping, like me, that leaders will finally have to rise to the challenge and do what is right. Let me bring you all back to a key experience in my own life, one that gives me some reason for optimism. Back in 1979, I was a single female speaker in the renowned Davos Economic Forum, asked to speak about quality of life in the 1980s. I was a sole progressive and green voice in a totally male-dominated conference. As a young environment minister, I focused on the urgency of protecting our environment. But I also addressed inequality and the rights of women, making clear the need to fully embrace and empower women to help grow our societies socially and economically. All I heard as a response was that any such concern was irrelevant for the business community. Business leaders should only focus on one single goal the financial bottom line. All other critical issues and concerns, whether social, environmental, or cultural, were up to governments. The reality that the world we share, the world we all influence, is a common responsibility, only took hold slowly and gradually over the next 35 years. The Tang Prize itself, with its pillar on sustainable development, is one example of this. Seeing the world finally come together in 2015 on the SDGs and on climate illustrates the awareness that we are all in this together. There has been a real sea change. Today, we are many more who are convinced we are all responsible for our common future. Thank you so much.
Greetings from Bucks County, Pennsylvania in the United States, and congratulations to Jane for your award, and thank you for your lifelong commitment to all life on our planet, which has inspired people worldwide. Your dedication to education of young people is unrivaled. And nobody understands the importance of education better than Dr. Yin. So you will find that you have a soulmate in the founder of the Tang Prize. Conservation of nature and climate change, our respective research areas, are tightly intertwined, as will become clear to everybody as climate change grows and its impact on nature increases. I'm optimistic, as I know you are, that humanity can manage climate change and humanity can conserve nature, but it will not be easy. We witnessed with the COVID-19 pandemic the difficulty caused by delayed response. The delay with COVID is days and weeks, but with climate, it is decades and centuries. The delayed response of climate means that there's more global warming in the pipeline. That's a problem because the growth of human-made gases in the air is now 10 times faster than has ever occurred on Earth. We are already seeing effects of climate on habitability of our planet. Life in some low-latitude areas is becoming more difficult. If we continue on our present course, some regions will become uninhabitable. Climate change increases the range of pathogens and the threat of infectious disease. So as climate change grows, pressures to emigrate will increase, which will compound human problems. And there's a danger that we could lose control. However, the delayed response of climate is also our friend. It provides us a chance to make changes that are needed to assure global habitability. Climate science tells us that we must backtrack on human-made forcings of the climate system. That is possible, and it makes sense for other reasons. We must backtrack on the climate forcing so that we can preserve our shorelines and our coastal cities. And that will have many co-benefits. Nature is resilient. If we reduce pressure on nature and move back toward 20th century climate, nature will have an easier time and we will all benefit. Education is crucial for managing the future for humanity and nature. Scientists can play an important role in the coming years, while some governments are still bickering about less important things. Scientists can cooperate across borders, work together, and educate young people. Then, as all governments realize that we are all in one boat, we can work together to preserve the future of life on Earth. I'm grateful to the Tang Foundation for their support, which is helping me to finish the book Sophie's Planet, in which I describe actions that are needed to manage our planet's energy balance and restore a healthy climate. And let me end by thanking Jane Goodall again for her remarkable lifetime work, and thanking Dr. Yin for his insight in recognizing that the best way to get governments to cooperate is to support education without regard to borders. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.
I'm delighted to be part of this distinguished panel. I want to thank the Tang Foundation for inviting me. I'm going to talk about health of people, health of the planet, and our responsibility. This is also the title of a book I co-edited and co-authored with 20 other distinguished scientists from around the world. And this book was sponsored by the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences. The world now is in the midst of a public health crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has made all of us aware of a dominant issue of our time, social justice. Social justice is also a major issue for climate change. Laureate, popularly known as the Climate Encyclical, written by Pope Francis, said, "We are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental." Let me give you one example. More than 50% of the climate pollution is from the wealthiest 1 billion people in the planet. The poorest 3 billion, their contribution to climate pollution is only 5%, and yet we all know they will suffer the worst consequences of climate disruption. The planetary warming is likely to exceed 1.5 degrees in 10 years by 2030. That's about a 50% amplification of the warming we already experienced as of now. Just this year, my state, California, is experiencing the worst fires in its history. And a desert region in the state has recorded the hottest temperature ever recorded in the planet. In about 10 years or less, as we approach the 1.5 degree warming, climate change will move into everyone's living room, just like what COVID has done. In my view, COVID-19 is the dress rehearsal for what we are likely to face with climate change in about 10 years. It will require global cooperation, since pollution emission anywhere in the planet will lead to warming everywhere in the planet. That's why it's called global warming. In our book, we declare with unchecked air pollution and climate change, the very fabric of life, including human health, is at grave risk. Air pollution from fossil fuels alone kills over 5 million people every year. In addition, weather extremes around the planet are claiming lives too. Weather extremes over the last 20 years period claimed 600,000 lives and displaced 4 billion people. The overarching solution requires a societal transformation which will enable a fundamental change in our attitude towards nature and towards each other. The technical solution, on the other hand, is simple in principle. We just have to phase out fossil fuels within 20 years and transition to 100% renewable, like solar, wind, geothermal, etc. So why have we not done it? We lack the sort of massive public support we need for such transformation of our energy source and our way of living. So how do we get it? How do we get that support? Let me give you two examples of two avenues I'm pursuing. First, teaming up with over 50 academics at the University of California, we have created an Education for All program to empower 1 million climate warriors in the planet. Next, I think we need to form an alliance with faith leaders so we can take the message directly to the public. I'm personally working with the Vatican as well as evangelical and Catholic leaders in the US and other faiths to take the education directly to the public through churches and other places of worship. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for the remarkable insights from all the past laureates of the Tang Prize in Sustainable Development. Please remember to scan the QR code and raise your questions online via Slido. And now, it's time for the panel session. Let's welcome today's moderator, James Liao, President of Academia SNICA, and panelist, Huizhen Jenny Shu, President of National Cheng Kung University, and Jiawei Li, Professor at the Department of Life Science, National Tsinghua University, and Dr. James Goodall, laureate of the 2020 Tang Prize, is now online. Please take your seats. And now, we'll leave the time to the moderator.
Hello, everyone, again. Good morning, Dr. Goodall. Can you hear us? Hello?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Welcome to this forum. Now we have in our stadium around 150 people in our audience. And we are joined by Dr. Jenny Su, who is the president of Cheng Kung University in southern Taiwan, and Dr. Jiawei Li, who is a biology professor in Tsinghua University. That's where we are now. First, we will invite the two panelists to give short remarks on the topic that we are all interested in today. First, President Jenny Su.
Well, good afternoon to the audience here, and good morning, Dr. Goodall. I hope this is the time zone you're at. In the interest of time, let me begin by extending my heartiest congratulations to the most deserving honor of being the recipient of Tang Prize Award 2020. But in the interest of time, let me very briefly offer a few my own sentiments toward connection to the theme of this forum as well as your opening talk. I think as of today, the newest WHO data shows there have been more than 30 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including close to 1 million deaths around the world. This pandemic of such an unprecedented scale is viewed as a crisis of systematic human development. It is afflicting our health, both physically and psychologically, our society, economy, education, and many other aspects of our daily lives. Did we really not see it coming? I think Dr. Brennan had also mentioned in her talk. Yes, we did. If one looks at the history of pandemic, you may already know that for every 30 to 35 years, there's likely one influenza pandemic. Therefore, it is only a matter of time that the next pandemic is coming. So what should we learn from the current one? I think the first pressing matter is to enhance the resilience of our health system. Professor Gilson had mentioned that we define a health system's resilience by focusing on the extent of the system's preparedness and response to a severe and acute shock. Examine how the system can absorb, adapt, and transform itself to cope with the ensuing changes. However, a growing amount of literature has also broadened the scope of examination and looked at the level of vulnerability of the system, which concerned the management of predictable and enduring strengths or stresses on the system. We have seen how the number of patients and the duration of the pandemic have posed a great challenge to many health sectors in the world. Strategies about governance, finance, resources, and service delivery are imperative in tackling these challenges. Secondly, I think while a pandemic potentially attacks everyone, regardless of who they are, there's no doubt that the poor are the ones that hit most hard. This pandemic has mercilessly exposed and aggravated the inequality. According to the United Nations University, a global pandemic can increase the extent of global poverty by dragging as many as 500 million of people, and that's 8% of the total human population below the poverty line. This will be the first time that the poverty has deepened globally in 30 years, since 1990. It triggers a chain reaction that increases the rates of children's mortality, undernutrition, and education deprivation. As for education, which is another passion of mine, it is sadly admitted that the pandemic's impact on it is tremendous. Although the statistics has been fluctuating, at least 8.8 billion learners have been affected, and the figure is roughly 47, close to 50% of the enrolled learners as of September. 41% of the educational institutions around the world have announced a change of academic calendar for the fall of 2020. And some of us have to do that as well here. While we all seem to suffer, this crisis can be a major turning point of human history. It is legitimate to say that sustainability may be the key to the recovery in this pandemic era. The response we take to address the challenges posed by the pandemic also contribute and build towards long-term SDG commitments. Each country should come up with tailored strategies to respond to their greatest needs. And the efforts at the local level need to be strengthened and supported. However, all of these resources must also add up to a set of coordinated actions that matches the global scale of COVID-19 in order to counter the overall risk of falling short on the SDG. The formation of multilateral system is crucial in supporting all the implementation of the strategies. According to the UN, there are 3 priorities that we should focus on. The first is to maintain the past progresses that have been made towards eradicating basic deprivations, including the elimination of social or legal barriers for the disadvantaged, and the provision of support in response to their particular needs. Second, the universal provision of quality essential services is urgent. And multilateral efforts are needed to address the root causes of this condition. The expansion of service, which can possibly generate stable jobs, we create a win-win situation. And third, we also need to reverse the course of degradation of nature. I think it was mentioned earlier, the pandemic has offered a case to observe. Drops in nitrogen dioxide emission by 30 to 60% from all human activities are being recorded in many, many European cities like Barcelona, Madrid, Milan, Paris, Rome, according to the European Environmental Agency. The current change in patterns of human activities are expected to enable us to gain a better understanding of the human impact on biodiversity. There's no time like the present time, as I said many times. In concurrence with the claim in Dr. Jane Goodall's opening lecture, we are all part of this ecosystem. This pandemic may be disruptive, but it can create a new opportunity of advancement toward sustainability. This may be the long-awaited chance to accelerate the progress to the goal and strengthen our core capabilities for pandemic preparedness. This is also the best time to systematically reshape the 21st century economy with a cleaner, greener, healthier, safer, and more resilient fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Su. Now we'd like to invite Professor Li from Tsinghua University to make a few remarks.
Thank you. The title of my short talk today is Rescuing the Endangered Plant Kingdom. Dr. Goodall, your dedication to conserve the nature inspired us a lot. Thanks. Facing the endemic, the Global Natural History Museum, Botanic Garden, and the zoos, the majority of them have been closed, shut down, and their conservation effort has been dramatically reduced. This is a serious drawback. We all should concern about that. Realizing the rapid decline of the plant diversity, back to 2007, we set up a Dr. Cecilia Gould Foundation to set up a conservation center to conserve the tropical and subtropical plants in order to sustain the richest biodiversity on Earth. Here, I would like to shortly report the progress. Until now, we have 17 giant greenhouses to host more than 33,000 kinds of plants, representing 10% of the plant diversity growing in our greenhouse. For example, the orchids, there are more than 9,000 kinds, representing around 20% of world diversity. For the non-flower plants like the ferns, there are 2,100 species have been conserved. That means more than 20% of the world diversity. For the pineapple family, we conserve about 55% of the world diversity. For the succulents, we have around 40% of diversity in the greenhouse. Starting from 2012, we expanded our efforts to abroad. For example, the Solomon Islands. All the major islands there were facing the clean cut, the logging industry. So starting from 2012, we spent 5 years sending botanists to the Solomon Islands and brought back more than 45,000 vulture specimens and around 5,000 living plants back to our conservation center. We also work in Sao Tome and Principe in Africa. For example, the begonias there, they were isolated from the Africa continent, just like Taiwan. We were isolated from the mainland China. We keep a distance and have the opportunity to evolve new and unique species here. We expand the activity to countries like Kiribati and St. Vincent in Central and South America. Brought back those unique plants to be conserved. Starting from 2 years ago, we work with Vietnam to explore their rich southern highland diversities. 3 years ago, we initiated the ambitious deep frozen project. Using the liquid nitrogen, we plan to keep 250,000 specimens kept in the liquid nitrogen. This is a project to keep the molecules for the next generation botanists. In conclusion, we are not shorting of budget, but we're shortage of manpower. We need those young blood willing to dedicate their energy to rescue the endangered ecological earth. So that's why 2016, a Future Earth Ecology program has been launched. This year, in total, we have 100 graduate students finish the course. And this is the project where expand to other countries. Human beings have to link together to save the materials for restore, demolish the ecological system. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Now we have heard the panelists for their opinions on the various issues related to sustainability, which included obviously climate change, environmental conservation, and the most important issue that we're facing today, the pandemic. And Dr. Lee also talked about the biodiversity and plant conservation. Now we'd like to open up the forum for the audience to interact with the panelists. Please type in your questions in your software. First, we already have a question. What can you advise those leaders that believe on economic growth rather than conservation? I believe this question is for Dr. Goodall.
Well, I think it very much depends on which leader we're talking about.
Very good comment.
Yeah, but I fear there are some leaders who simply won't listen, leaders who deny climate change has anything to do with humans. How can you change them? How can you persuade them away from their passion to get back to business as usual, to make more money, to seek more power? But there are other leaders who you can speak to. And I always feel it's very important if you're talking to anyone, whether it's a world leader or whether it's a teacher or whether it's a parent, you've got to, first of all, find some connection with them. Maybe they have a dog. I love dogs. Anything that will make a connection. And then try and listen to them. Why are they thinking the way they do? And then try and reach the heart. Because with some people, it's impossible to argue. They're not going to listen. They're going to try and think of responses that prove they're right and you're wrong, in your opinion. And so, but if you can reach into the heart and they can change from within so that it's their passion that is causing a change in leadership, then I think that's how I've always tried to do it. And some world leaders, and especially business leaders, are very responsive, and there is change. I think that's what we have to realize. There are world leaders who are beginning to understand the existential threat of climate change. And there are corporate leaders who have changed the way that they manufacture their goods. And part of that is consumer pressure. If people say, and that's what the more wealthy people can do and are doing, I'm not going to buy those products because they're made in an environmentally or socially unethical way. And that does change the way business operates.
Thank you. I believe that was a question from Tanzania. Any other panelists want to offer some more opinions on this issue? How do you talk to the leaders?
Just very brief, my own experiences, as Dr. Guru had mentioned, finding a connection toward this particular leader in any form you can definitely helps. But I also find in recent years that the development of technology in various areas certainly have opened a new possibility for the leader to reconsider different type of economic growth. So if we can somehow bridge in the disparity across regions and have a feasible and effective way to set up a complementary working module for different parties to be engaged together, I think any leader will be interested in any form of working mechanism to engage all stakeholders possible. And I find that could be another alternative way of persuading or convincing the leader to be engaged in the common sort of goal that we are all interested in or believe in. So that would be my input.
Thank you. Dr. Guru also mentioned a very important key point, that is talking to their hearts. I think that's important. We are all human beings. We are all reasonable. If you find a way to talk to their hearts, that will be very useful. The next question, one of the serious problems is that there are too many people on the earth. I want to know what is your opinion of this increasing population. Dr. Jane Goodall, do you want to take on this problem first?
Well, I've already mentioned it in my talk that, already with 7.2 billion, we're using up natural resources faster than nature can restore them in some places. And what's going to happen when there's 9.7, closer to 10 billion of us in 2050? I can't answer that question. All I can say is that for too long, this question has been considered so politically incorrect that people won't talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. And if you mention it, you're immediately accused of supporting the wealthy against the poor. And this is so not the case. And I very much wonder if those people who criticize, they've criticized me very seldom, but they have, you're condemning the poor people, you're blaming them for the population increase, whereas it's the wealthy people who are responsible. And, well, I wonder if those people have been out where I've been in some of the poorer countries, if they've seen the poverty and the suffering, if they've talked to the women who are desperate to educate their children, they can't educate 7 or 8. They don't want 7 or 8. They don't want to be baby machines. They want to space the births in a reasonable way. But unless they get some help and some family planning, that isn't possible for them. And so we have, in our programs in Africa, in 7 different countries, we provide family planning, which is delivered by the local people. And it's so eagerly received. And the women talk glowingly about, now I can plan my children. I have one, and then after a year, I can go back to work and I can get a microcredit loan, because we do those based on Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank. And then I can raise some more money, and then I can employ somebody to look after the child, and then I can have a second child, and then I can educate both of them and give them a really good education so that they'll get on in the world, and it'll be easier for them than me. So my point is that we can do something about it if we do it in the right way, not talking about population control, but I decided I would talk about voluntary population optimization. That's pretty good.
Voluntary population optimization. That's great.
15 years ago, I have been in Africa. I just to see you there. You have a Pimbandi Research Center Institute. paper in the Taiwan Medical Association. There's Peter, Jane, Margaret, small Kimbanji. You know, we took the picture with you. Remember, 15 years ago. You know, I brought last night I stayed in the hotel. I brought a gift to you now. I thought you will be here. My name is Sylvia Fu. Shakespeare has a poem, Who is Sylvia? I'm Sylvia Fu. I finished medical school Taita, then I went to Harvard and Einstein Medical Center, New York, and Tokyo University. I have been more than 100 countries in the world, and Africa 30 countries. And to visit you here, I wrote the paper. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for your comment. So the next question is an interesting one. I'm not sure Dr. Grove-Brundtland is online, but this is actually a question for Dr. Grove-Brundtland. How could the team of Dr. Grove-Brundtland predicted the COVID-19 pandemic so early last year? Or they just assume a pandemic might happen in the future? So I think that since Dr. Grove-Brundtland is not online, I think the panelists can probably share your wisdom, your comment on how people can foresee this inevitable pandemic coming along.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Jane Goodall, please. Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, you know, I am very familiar with a number of people who've been studying zoonotic diseases for years and years and years. They all have predicted there would be a pandemic like this. There are many epidemics that are contained within a region, but then occasionally there's a pandemic. I think it took WHO quite a long time to label coronavirus, the COVID-19, as a pandemic, but finally they did because it went all around the world. And this has been predicted for a very long time. And the zoonotic disease scientists have said, well, we don't know exactly when it will come, but these zoonotic diseases are getting more and more frequent, and so there will be another pandemic. That's what they said. No, none of them, as far as I know, predicted precisely when it would come.
Yes, there's actually even a movie made a few years ago, Contagion, about almost exactly the same thing. Anyone want to add on to the comment? Okay, the next one probably is from a local student here. This is a question for Dr. Goodall. How do you suggest us, who are university students, who want to change, to reverse the climate change, to attract public attention, to adjust their life that was unsustainable? So this was a question from a university student here.
Okay, well, the first thing I would advise you is to reach out to the Jane Goodall Institute in Taiwan and get in the computer program there, because that will put you immediately in touch with groups of young people who feel just as you do. And one of the things that we found in our program, we don't dictate to the young people. We encourage them to get together and discuss their plans. Of course, for the very little ones in kindergarten and first grade, they need wise guidance. But by the time you get to university, you'll find that there's a lot of you who care passionately about climate change. Of course you do, because it's destroying your future. So get together and talk about it. But one thing I would advise you, keep away from anything that smacks of any kind of aggressive or violent approach, because that won't work. It will merely put barriers up and hinder your attempts to make change. So in our program, we encourage young people to take action themselves, to do something in groups that will actually mitigate climate change themselves, because leaders lead by example. So if there's a group of young people who've been working really hard with their sleeves rolled up to plant trees, to protect forests, to remove invasive species, to clean up rivers, then the people you're wanting to change are much more likely to listen to you if you can come up and say, well, look, we did this. And if you could help us scale this up to the whole country, it would make a huge difference in controlling emissions.
Thank you. People lead by the examples. Well said, Dr. Goodall. We have two university professors here. Could you recommend how students can take actions to change people's behavior so that they can be more sustainable future?
First, we have to a little bit define the sustainability. This is a very vague term. For example, we worry the global climate change because of the increase of carbon dioxide concentration. This year, at this moment, is about 412 ppm. But it's much higher this is the record high in the past about 1 million years. But if we check the weather back to 50 million years ago, the carbon dioxide concentration is about 5,000 ppm, more than 10 times of the current concentration. If we back to the origin of the Earth, it's about 7,000 ppm. So this is nature fluctuation. If human beings would like to live on Earth forever, that's almost impossible because you have to face that kind of natural fluctuation. So the sustainability means a very short term. That means the future decades or future centuries. Inevitable, we have to develop a strategy to accommodate those huge fluctuations in the future. It's not in our lifetime, but this is the obligation of this species, the human beings. If we have the obligation to manage it or keep the Earth a little bit longer. Thank you.
Well, I totally agree with Dr. Goodall's comment. I think putting yourself and joining any organization that has global presence or global connection would definitely help you to put yourself in a greater and a broader perspective for any global issues. But at the same time, I think if it helps you in better engage in this activity by knowing your local details. Over the years, we found our university students, and especially those either are part of the institute or those younger group in the Roots and Shoots program, whenever they are able to get in touch directly with either a local community or a priority of local issues, they would better prepare themselves through study the problems and finding out their own resolutions. And through that, they will find engagement with the local citizens together. Through the activity, they find themselves in a better position to voice themselves out. So with a peer, you find the support. But with the engagement, you find your power, you find your sort of presence and your later impacts on the issues that you believe in, and that's fine, where you find your sustainable strength in engaging in these club activities. So that would be my observations.
Thank you. So the key word is engagement. So students should engage in local activities and public affairs. The next question, in view of conservation and sustainable development, how can we rescue the pandemic of COVID-19? What can we do to prevent the next pandemic? This is a big question. So hopefully have a big answer. Dr. Jane Goodall, please, could you take on this one first?
Well, you know, I've sort of addressed it. And first of all, let's make it clear, I am not somebody who has studied infectious diseases, zoonotic diseases, and so on. But I have met many people who are experts. I've read books. And as I have said, we can help to prevent the next pandemic by being more respectful of nature and animals. If we continue to destroy the natural world, if we continue to force animals closer and closer to us in order to survive or try to survive, because very often they get shot because they're looking for food. If we continue to hunt, kill, and eat animals, particularly in unhygienic conditions, then inevitably there will be more epidemics, some of which may become pandemics. So we can help to mitigate it. And of course, yes, we can get our health systems readier. It's been suggested that the reason the pandemic hasn't spread as fast as was expected in Africa is because so many of the countries there have had to deal with Ebola and HIV, AIDS, and all these other horrible diseases that are so prevalent in the tropics. But, you know, the key thing is this new respectful attitude towards the environment and towards animals, which is the real parkland of our Roots and Shoots program. And if we want to do that, you know, one of the most important things we can do, we've got to clean up the ocean. We've got to protect the remaining forests of the planet. About half have already gone. We've got to try and restore those forests. And then earlier it was mentioned, I think in the very beginning of the introduction of me somewhere, about the Trillion Tree Project. It's been estimated by some scientists, and I have no comment on this, but they've estimated there's enough space to plant 1 trillion trees, and this would then absorb CO2 rapidly from the environment while we come up with technological ways of living in greater harmony with nature. And so this tree planting, which is something everybody can do, you know, in some cases we can help to save the existing forests. In some cases we can raise money to help plant trees of the right species at the right time in the right soil to restore some of these forests. But urban tree planting is tremendously important. It helps to control the climate in a city. It helps to clean the air in a city. And it's been shown now that trees and plants and nature can be so beneficial to mental health and physical health that actually it reduces the cost of treating people's health. So this tree planting, I mean, trees, I love trees. I grew up in this house in England, and I look out of my window now and I see the tree I climbed as a child, up which I used to spend hours and hours. It's a beech tree. Trees do so much for us, not just absorbing CO2 and giving out oxygen, but helping our sense of well-being. The roots are preventing too much flooding as they stabilize the soils. It's just amazing what trees can do for us.
Thank you. So most of the pandemics are caused by so-called zoonotic diseases, meaning that the disease was transmitted from animals to human beings. So if we don't respect animals, we kill them, we eat them in a disrespectful way, we're going to increase the chance of getting infected. In addition, the climate change, even though superficially it sounds as a different problem, but the more climate change that we experience, the more we are forced to have closer contact with animals and closer contact with pathogens. So actually, as Dr. Jane Goodall and others have mentioned, we all live in a very integrated world. Every small piece is crucially important. So we have to find a sustainable way to conduct our life and development. The two professors want to add on something. Do you have any thoughts on how to stop the future pandemics?
This is really hard to answer questions. Starting from 2 weeks ago, I'm taking an online class organized by MIT biology departments. They invite 12 world-leading scientists on this topic. So I would like to encourage the students who are interested in this topic, you should take class first. Listen to those experts in this field. And I think probably we can get some answer from that. But for sure, this is really difficult test.
I think being a bench scientist myself, one thing I remember every day is we are humble, but what we see in the lab every day when you live the lab, through the data, through what you discover, those unidentified sort of facts from how the microbial species behave or how they are interconnected with each other. But rather than sort of hoping to stop the whole thing once for all, maybe another way to look at the issues, have the whole humanity to be better prepared and to be more resilient. And one way, is, as far as I am concerned, is this probably is also the best way to find a new orientation for the entire humanity in the whole ecosystem. We have long to assume too much in being the central or centric to all the rest of the reactions or activity. But in fact, we are equal. I mean, every species in the whole system is all equal to each other. So I guess that's what Dr. Goodall has repeatedly mentioned, being respectful for everything that is in the whole, in the system together. And we probably will find a way out. We will come through, as you have mentioned in the talk.
Thank you. The next question is a little on the light side, and it's for Jane Goodall. Dr. Goodall, can you please give us an introduction of the pictures on your bookshelf? What's the name of your dog? Did you take those pictures yourselves? What's the name of the chimpanzees?
All right, well, this one over here is the dog I had who taught me. So when I got to Cambridge in 1972, the professors told me, I'd been 2 years with the chimps, I'd never been to college. They told me I had no right to give the chimpanzees names, they should have had numbers, and I couldn't talk about them having personality, mind, or emotion because they were unique to us. It was taught to me by my dog, Rusty. So he is very special in my life. The first chimpanzee to lose his fear and who demonstrated the tool using in tool making up here is David Greybeard. And then over on this side, we have my amazing mother. She's the one who supported my childhood dream when I was 10 and decided I would go to Africa, live with animals and write books about them. And everybody laughed at me, how can you do that? You're just a girl. And she said, if you really want to do this, you're going to have to work awfully hard, take advantage of every opportunity. If you don't give up, you may find a way. And that's the message I've taken to young people all around the world, particularly those in disadvantaged communities. And finally, there's Frodo, who was an alpha male, a bully. He actually caused me quite a bit of grief, but he was very beautiful. And he also had a loving side, just like some humans. They're not very nice, but they have a loving side. And then finally, this drawing of a dog, it just shows that we should never give up, that we can accomplish the impossible. And we should aim to do so, even though we probably won't get there. No dog can carry a tree trunk.
Thank you. By the way, I also sent my daughter to Africa. I did.
Yes. By the way, a lot of people have seen me with Mr. A. And he's just told me, Jane, I really wish to be introduced. I want people to know that I'm still with you. and present on all your talks and Zooms and Skypes and podcasts and webinars and all the other ways. I'm busier now than I've been in my whole life. And Mr. H is always with me.
Great. Next question. Let's get back to a serious discussion. If the pandemic ended and the human activities recovered to the normal level, would you be optimistic or pessimistic to nature conservation after COVID-19?
Well, I'll just very quickly say, if we get back to business as it was before COVID-19, if we get back to this ridiculous idea that everybody's economy can improve around the world when we're already damaging the environment and we have a growing human population, then I see a very, very bleak future for my grandchildren. And as long as I live, I will fight to persuade people to move forward in a different way, to look for a new green economy, and perhaps create a new definition of success. What does it mean to be successful? Must it always be to get more money, to get more wealth, to get more stuff, to get more power? Or can it simply be, I've done enough, I can lead a good life, I can support myself and my family, I have leisure time to do the things I really want to do. Isn't that success too?
Yes, thank you. Do the two professors want to add anything?
I would tend to think the greatest challenges that we all face now is not so much wanting to go back to or waiting for going back to the normal, quote unquote, the normal as defined by where we came through or how it was. But I think the effort should be made on how we would just as assertive in looking at this is a time to really create and mobilize the presence of a new paradigm, the paradigm that will carry us to a better and more friendly future that will allow all the species and all the stakeholders in the universe can coexist in a more sustainable way. So I would really hope that every effort that we are making now is to make sure that we are moving forward to a new era, the era that has enlightened a new paradigm for the future lifestyle and the future economy pattern. That would be something that I'm hopeful to.
Dr. Lee?
During the pandemic, the traffic in the city is much less, and the sky looks brighter and blue. But this is not reality in the whole world, since the nature disasters and the clear-cut logging industry didn't stop at all. The speed of cutting trees is increasing. So I'm not so optimistic about the end of the pandemic. We probably have to face a much worse environment at that time. So the challenge and the effort should scale up once the disease stopped. Although it will be 2 or 3 years later, but we have to face a new environment with a lot of losses of biodiversity. That's something I really worried.
Thank you. Next question. Dear Dr. Goodall, could you talk more about the program of Roots and Shoots? Thank you.
Well, Roots and Shoots began in 1991 in Tanzania with 12 high school students who were concerned about things that were going wrong in the city where they lived, Dar es Salaam. And some were concerned about the street children with no homes. Some were angry that the government wasn't properly prosecuting the poachers who were killing animals in their national parks. Some were worried about the illegal dynamite fishing that was destroying the coral reefs. And some were worried about the cruel treatment of stray dogs, etc. So they asked me to help them sort these out. And I said, well, go and get your friends who also care. We had a big meeting, and Roots and Shoots was born with the main message: every one of us makes a difference every day, and we have a choice as to what sort of difference we make, with the provision that every group between them would choose 3 projects: animals, people, environment, because everything is interwoven. And it's now spread to 65 countries. It's spread to all ages. And we've had a number of global international gatherings. There's a very strong Roots and Shoots program in Taiwan, and the Jane Goodall Institute, run by Kelly Koch, who's doing all the translating for me, and is a fantastic person. So you can find out a lot more about Roots and Shoots when you check out the website in Taiwan. But it's my greatest hope for the future, because these young people, it's not that young people can change the world. Young people are changing the world, even as we speak. And it's amazing to see what's happening in Africa. There's Roots and Shoots over the whole country. And finally, why is it called Roots and Shoots? Think of a big tree that you love. It probably began as a small seed, maybe a very small seed. And you pick it up when it starts to grow, and it looks so small and insignificant. But you know, those little roots and that little shoot, there's a life force, I call it a magic, in that tiny seed that is so strong and powerful that the little roots, to reach the water, can work through rocks and eventually push them aside. The little shoot, to reach the sunlight, can work through cracks in a brick wall and eventually knock it down. So we see the rocks and the walls as all the problems, environmental and social, that we have inflicted on this poor old planet. And it's a message of hope. Hundreds and thousands of young people around the world can change. And we also have not only the hundreds and thousands of young people involved today in these 68 countries, but we also have what I call the alumni, those who've been through the program in school or university, and they hang on to their values. And many of them are now in decision-making places. And it just shows what they're doing when they reach that stage in life.
Thank you. Next question. We know that fossil fuel contribute to greenhouse gas. What can we do to change our life to decrease the rate of fossil fuel consumption? This is also a big question. I wondered anyone can address this one.
Well, does somebody else want to go first?
Okay.
All right.
Okay. No. Dr. Goodall, you want to go first? Yes. Yes.
No, you come on.
Go on.
Okay. Fine. In a way, we are organized in a different way of managing sort of mass activity. In many ways, that often, when most of the programs are organized, they would automatically go to a sort of physical scale of a requirement. But if you take another way of putting a requirement, for instance, the total energy level allowed or designated to be consumed on this particular program, then you find students and organizers soon to be very, very creative in offering different options of making those programs realized. So I guess it's the sort of optimal goal that you put forward as an overall guideline to really lead this project that will fundamentally change the way we think about how freely we should consume those energies. So we put in there pretty much now in the university program as a lead questions for any organizer or organizing committee to put forward or to discuss first before the activity can be put forward. So this is our way of answering to the responsibility at the university level.
Thank you. Dr. Goodall, do you want to add on to this?
I do. I would say, you know, first of all, we've got to really push towards non-renewable. to green energy, solar, wind, tide. That's going to be really important to reduce emissions. Electric cars, they've got a long way to go because of the problem of batteries and things, but it sort of shows that innovative minds are thinking in the right way. And in addition to that, we need to, I mean, in Taiwan, you do really well with mass transit. In other countries, it's pretty grim. And when I say to my sister, why don't your grandchildren use the bus like we did as children? She says, well, the cost of traveling by bus is so much greater than if we take them by car. So that's something that governments have to get involved in. And then the other thing which I have to say, other than, of course, there's more use of bicycles, much more use. In the UK, we've got many, many people. In fact, it's hard to get a bicycle now. You see many more bicycles on the street. And we have to remember, it's not just fossil fuels that's causing the greenhouse gases. It's also other gases. And one of the main ones is methane. And methane comes from the digestive process of mammals. I don't know if it does with birds, I'm not sure, but anyway. So the billions and billions of animals farmed as more and more people want more and more meat is causing an enormous amount of methane gas to go out into the atmosphere to join the CO2. And I can't resist saying at this point that this intensive farming of animals is leading to so much environmental destruction as areas are cleared to grow the grain to feed them all, as fossil fuel is used to get the grain to the animals to the abattoir, and the abattoir the meat to the table. And also it's using a lot of water to change vegetable to animal protein. And around the world, freshwater sources in some places are drying up. So that's just a word for please. One thing you can do is eat less meat, even better, eat no meat, even better, be a vegan. But whatever you do, it will make a difference. Just a little less, Meatless Monday, for example.
Dr. Lee, do you have anything to add on this?
Not much, actually, but I would like to talk a similar question on biodiversity. There's international consensus on increasing or maintain the global biodiversity, reached the agreement 20 years ago. They set a goal, say 2010, we should reach some achievement. But a year before 2010, all failed. No item reached the goal at all. So they reset a new goal for 2020. And 2 months ago, they all agreed. We failed again. There's a big distance between the reality and the goal. So I'm worried about the same thing in the fossil fuel. So many countries claim they will reduce their carbon dioxide emission by 2035 to reach zero, but it's not so optimistic. We need real effort to reach our promise. Otherwise, it's just a term. That's not the progress.
I think the current goal for all the... Dr. Goodall?
I was just going to say, as we fight to reach that, level of emission reduction, what we can do and what we must do and what we're trying to do is to protect the forests and clean the ocean so that they can do their job of being the lungs of the world and give us breathing space for new technologies and new targets to be achieved by different governments around the world.
Yes, that's also a very important issue. Let me get back to what I was going to say. The goal for the Paris Agreement is to achieve net zero emission by the year 2050. So we have 30 years to go. Time comes very fast. And this is a very tall order, that we will have to invest in novel technology development, not just using the current technology. In addition, like what Dr. Goodall has said, land use changes keep the preservation of forest, reduce the meat consumption, and so on and so forth, basically reduce the carbon footprint for everyone is crucial to the success of net zero emission by 2050. Next, how can we sustain the balance between the social development against poverty and the ecological conservation? I think this is also a common question that developing world are also in need of cheap energy, which is by current standard is probably fossil fuel. And how do we balance such a social development against the ecological conservation?
Okay, well, the reason I left my paradise in Gombe National Park, where I was out in the rainforest and learning about the chimpanzees, was because at a conference in 1986, I realized the speed with which forests were disappearing in Africa and chimpanzee numbers were dropping. And I knew I had to try and do something about it. And so I got a bit of money together, and I managed to get to 7 different range countries for the chimpanzees, because I think you need to learn firsthand about something before you can really speak from your heart about it. And I learned a lot about the plight of the chimps, the disappearing habitat, the being shot for bushmeat, being captured so that infants can be sold overseas for pets or zoos or something like that, and being caught in wire snares. But in addition to that, it really hit me about the problems faced by so many of the African people living in and around chimpanzee habitat. And when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, when I began in 1960, that was part of the great equatorial forest belt that stretched across Africa to the west coast. When I flew over in 1990, I was shocked to see a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills, more people living there than the land could support, farmland overused and infertile, cutting down the trees even, and it's an area of valleys like this along Lake Tanganyika, cutting down the trees on the steep slopes, causing terrible erosion in their desperation to grow more food to feed their families, too poor to buy food elsewhere. And that's when it hit me. If we don't help these people find a way of making a living without destroying the environment, we can't even try to save the chimpanzees. And that was the beginning of Take Care or Takari. And we began with a group of local people going into the 12 villages around Gombe and asking them what we could do to make their lives better. More food, yes, restoring fertility to the overused farmland without chemicals, the better health and education for their children. We worked with the Tanzanian authorities, who should have been doing that anyway. And then we could introduce water management programs and, as I've mentioned, microcredit and family planning. And it's so successful. It's now in 104 villages throughout the whole of the chimpanzee range in Tanzania. Every village provides volunteers who go to workshops to learn how to use smartphones, to register the health of their village forest reserves, where most of the chimps live, unprotected. And they've now realized that protecting the forest is as much for their own future good as to protect wildlife. And they've become our partners in conservation. And that program is now in 6 other African countries. So that's what we're trying to do. And at the same time, we provide these stoves that use much, much less, because they were using charcoal. And we've also introduced some solar stoves, some solar lamps, fast-growing species to form woodlots for each village, so they don't have to go and cut down more trees, and introduced agroforestry and permaculture, and it's made the most amazing difference.
Thank you. Jane?
I would be more also inclined to reflect on these issues. One thing that I think we can do is simply to reduce or elevate the inequalities. Taking most of the examples we have seen through the lecture or through our conversation today, we probably come to realize that most of the conflicts are linked to the accessibility to resources. For instance, those countries who have better way or more effective way to deal with the COVID-19 are those who either have the ample medical resources or those who can manage these resources more effectively. Taking education, taking poverty as an issue, it pretty much all come through the concern. So with the recent development and progress in AIoT technology and the data digitalization and transformation of those information, I think we now, for the first time, that have a chance to effectively mobilize this platform and network together so that we have a more effective way of utilizing and distributing the resources. By that, hopefully, we will be able to reduce the inequalities and therefore will find a balanced way of managing the ecology and societal development. So that would be my take-in from these messages.
Thank you. Dr. Lee?
In the past, there's a saying or school of thinking and the practice. Let the tourists pay for the conservation. There's a trend, but proved to be a failure, especially during the pandemic. Most of the parks or the reserve region, there's no ticket collection at all. So all the conservation efforts shut down. This is a matter of priority of the government. We should make that very clear to the government officials. Conservation should be one of the priority of the government activities. Otherwise, ask the tourists to pay for their conservation won't be workable. That's my opinion on this topic.
Thank you. The next question is uniquely for Dr. Goodall. After so many years in the field studying chimpanzees, what would you say about interacting with humans? Are chimpanzees also sometimes dramatic like humans?
Every chimpanzee has his or her own personality. Sometimes people say, do you prefer chimpanzees or humans? And I say, well, I prefer some chimpanzees over some humans, but some humans over some chimpanzees. And it's been, you know, we're now in our 61st year. We just had our 60th anniversary of the day I landed in Gombe. And we're now in the 4th generation. So we've been able to study the effect of maternal behavior on the offspring. And it's marked. We find that the mothers who are the most supportive, like my mother was to me, their offspring do better. The males attain a higher position in this male hierarchy and probably sire more infants. Well, they do sire more infants. We can now tell the father from DNA sampling from feces. And the females make better mothers. So what's been so fascinating about this study is seeing all the different ways that chimpanzees cope. They're very adaptable. We've seen actually the start of new tool-using traditions. And that's why carrying on with this study is so terribly important.
I don't think two of you have worked with chimpanzees. Well, you speak of female chimpanzees. From your observation, what are the roles of females play in the area of conservation and sustainable development?
Well, we found that in our villages where we have our Tukari program, it's really, I mean, for example, I talked about microcredit programs, and we find that it's the women who benefit the most. They work very hard. They take out a tiny loan. They maybe do something like take a piece of degraded ground and make a tree nursery or pineapples, or they start coffee or something like that. And we've had almost all of them repay that small loan. And then they can take out a larger one to develop the program if they wish. And the reason that it works so well for women is that they traditionally, they're concerned about the family. The man, yes, he goes out and raises money with his wages, but when he suddenly gets an influx of money, he tends to go out and drink with his friends to celebrate, and the money's gone. The woman hoards it. And the woman typically in many African countries has a really major role in the family. And I think that nurturing that's being built into us through evolution, that really makes a difference when you come to conservation. That said, many, many, many of the greatest conservation programs are organized by men. And at this point, I always like the saying of one of the Aboriginal, one of the indigenous tribes in Latin America, I forget which tribe, but he said to me, Jane, we see our tribe as like an eagle, and one wing is male and the other wing is female, and only when the wings are equal will our tribe fly true.
Yes, I think gender equality is certainly a way to go for everything we do in the future society, not just in conservation and sustainable development, but everything, every aspect of life that we do. Well, I hate to stop this forum, but our time is up. We appreciate all the panelists for sharing your thoughts on the very important issues, including climate change, conservation, and our current issues of pandemics. And I hope that through this discussion, we get a better understanding of how we can deal with our surroundings. And all the problems that we're facing are not isolated. They are all interacted together. So we have to respect each other, respect the environment, respect the animals. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Goodall. Thank you, Dr. Su and Professor Lee. And thank you for your participation. And thank you for those who watch us online. Have a good evening or a good day.
Thank you for all the wonderful views and comments. The 2020 Tang Prize Masters Forum in Sustainable Development has now come to an end. Thank you all for joining us today.